Hello, everyone. Welcome to Amrop India's initiative on Leaders for What's Next. Um, Personally, I look into a car when I sit in one. Can't afford a high premium car for a sorts, but it's happy to see when a car or a tractor or an off-road vehicle now suddenly starts boasting of a lot of technological advances. You can think of a cabin for a farmer on his tractor, which is air conditioned and so on. So a thought came to our mind as to see what we can learn from some of the industry leaders under our initiative called Leaders for What Next. And the topic for the day, what we decided to do is digitization and transformation, and specifically within that, the impact on the auto industry. So, as a first of these initiatives, it gives us great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Krishna Prasad. And I'm privy to the fact that he's called KP in the auto industry. And he's joining us today over Microsoft Teams. That itself is transformation. Otherwise, we would have met in person to share his experiences, his views, and perspectives. So, KP, as he's known in the industry, has had a sterling career so far, starting off with majors like Daimler, then working his way through Terex, which is an off-road major in various parts of the world. He's also worked in the interim with TACO, which is Tata Auto Components. And more recently, that means about 8+ years, he's headed the technical center for Delphi Automotive Systems, which in its recent avatar is called APTIV, before KP decided to move on and start his own strategic consulting outfit. So, welcome KP to the show, as I would call it.
Thank you, Ravindra, and thank you for inviting me. And yeah, it's a pleasure talking to you as always. And good morning to all who are viewing this and listening to this.
Great. Thanks a lot, KB. As the name suggests, or as the title prompts, we're talking about digitization and transformation, and within that gamut, one comes across terms like artificial intelligence, digitization, connected cars or connected vehicles, and we talk about electrification and a whole gamut of things. But KP, how do you think all these paradigm shifts, if you were to call it, between what was happening 10, 15 years ago and what's happening now, how has the innovation process or the transformation process changed in your experience? So that's a lead question, and within that there are a set of sub questions which you can address when you start sharing information, whether you have any perspectives on how it has changed for OEM players versus autocom players, or whether there are any significant changes if you cut across the product categories. When I say categories, it would mean,
Yeah,
let's say, passenger cars and off-road and two-wheeler, three-wheelers, and so on. So go ahead,
sure,
KP. All yours.
sure. No. I think as you rightly said, this whole digital transformation, and also to some extent the AI centric, kind of initiatives and products have tremendously impacted. I think not only automotive industry. I think it's impacting, a whole lot of industry, which we keep, hearing about and reading about. Of course, retail, as we all know, whether it's social media or e-commerce, I think that's where a lot of consumers are already kind of seeing it and experiencing it, whether it is recommender systems or, ratings and so on. But having said that, automotive industry for sure also has been positively impacted, let's say. you know and though you mentioned about 10, 15 years ago, I think it's kind of little bit more recent, though. Automotive industry has always been known for innovation, in bringing some of the great features into the vehicles. Probably in the last 5 to 6 years we have seen this kind of explosion of opportunities, and also the ability to bring some of these technologies right down to the vehicle, right down to the cabin, and then give that experience to the driver, to the occupant, to the user, and you name it.
Correct. So then, KP, probably as a leader of people in a tech center or
Yep.
in your previous avatars, you must have interacted with people all the time,
Yes. Yes.
whether they're
Yes.
clients, your own teams, and so on. So if we come down to the people aspect now and
Yes.
focus, because you've given us a very good summary of what all is changing in terms of product, in terms of
Hmm.
system, in terms of, let's say, integrated
Yeah,
things or offerings into the car inside and outside. But
yeah.
when we come to the people angle, what have your experiences been, in terms of, let's say, how do you put together teams? Because you
Yeah.
need teams to
Hmm.
work,
Yeah.
some specific learnings in that area.
Yes.
Two, how as a leader have you managed the innovation process or the change process?
Sure.
And specifically, what would you be giving as messages saying that, look, these are yet some of the gaps that you as an industry leader are feeling? Because we
Hmm.
would like our viewers also to understand what has changed,
Yeah.
what is being done, but what are the gaps remaining so that they pick up a few valuable insights from our conversation.
Sure. Sure.
You.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one fundamental, again, I call it a fundamental shift in the industry is, um, as I said, maybe even 5 years ago or 8 years ago, there used to be a fairly well understood kind of boundary. Let's call it that way. That what an OEM would be responsible for, how they would approach this whole vehicle integration, how they write specifications, and so on. And then how a systems provider, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, whatever, so what they would be doing and how they would be delivering the thing. So it used to be a fairly well understood boundary. And if I join a tier 1 thing, so I more or less I'm clear like what we need to do. And if I'm in an OEM, I was probably clear on what I need to do. But now what has happened, because of this whole connected car ecosystem, because of this whole digital development, and car being considered more like a digital infrastructure, where all these mobility services can be provided and so on, those lines have totally become blurred. In fact, the lines are slowly starting to vanish. And so today, if you stand back and see, probably the OEMs, the system providers, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, and some of these niche software technology providers, they're all vying for the same talent. And at a top level, these are good software engineers, people who understand the digital ecosystem, people who understand user experience, and maybe some amount of consumer technologies. All these companies, they are going behind the same talent. And of course, when it comes to AI and machine learning and data science, again, it's the same talent people are going through, because it's at the end of the day applying some good algorithms to the existing data, right? Of course, I'm not downplaying the domain understanding. Obviously, one needs to understand the domain and so on, but there is still a lot of talent needed to to close this talent gap, right? And which every company is kind of going behind. So from that point of view, the value proposition as a leader, like if I'm leading a systems provider, a tier 1 company, if I'm leading an OEM, the value proposition, of course, is strong brand. Like, okay, Mercedes Benz, a strong brand, or a Fiat, like, or Mahindra and Mahindra. Likewise, Delphi Automotive or any other Continental or Bosch, how do you still make sure that, hey, there is this strong brand proposition, and also ability to convey, hey, there is a long-term strategy, which we are pursuing. We want to be the leading mobility, whatever solutions company, and no longer a hardware-centric company. So there are a lot of companies who are trying to reimagine and redefine themselves that, hey, they are a solutions provider, no longer just a hardware-centric company, and so on. So there is this huge churn that is happening, and a leader has to be able to convey that to the people, and then kind of implement that that kind of strategy. All right. Then you asked, okay, as a leader, of course, like, how do I adapt to this whole kind of shift that is happening in terms of product, in terms of technology development, and so on. So one thing which we are seeing, at least last, again, 4 or 5 years, is even um, so-called conservative automotive industry, we have started speaking the language of agile. So till now people were looking at consumer internet companies, e-commerce companies talking about agile and agile way of delivery. Of course, agile has been there for a long time, but within automotive industry, we are also now talking about agile. So we are saying, how do I set up agile teams? So 5 6 years ago, probably we would organize our teams more along maybe components, which goes into the system and so on. But now, a lot of times people are talking about how do you reorganize into how do you deliver end customer feature. So how do you organize cross-functional, cross or multidisciplinary teams? So you put together a team. Maybe there is a hardware engineer, maybe there are a bunch of software engineers, there are automation engineers. They're all coming together as one team, and they try to concentrate on delivering one feature to a consumer, rather than, hey, I'm building some fundamental building blocks and later somebody will put together and deliver a feature, right? Again, that is, in my mind, a fundamental shift for leadership. So the leader has to start thinking, can I reimagine these teams and reorganize this team structure, right? So that is number one. Number two, also it comes down to how do, let's say, leaders manage the team and team members. And this is because what we call as the knowledge era. you know so till very recently, we always would assume that, as a leader, as a manager, I would know what is happening. I am familiar with the technology.
Mm.
But today, what is happening because of the digital transformation and on this huge amount of technology shifts, there is no way a leader can be fully conversant, with all these technologies. So we need to get into this mindset of how do I manage, my teams, fully knowing that what they are working on in terms of technologies is completely not comprehensible by me. So it becomes so very important to get into that mindset, but still provide that kind of leadership, set the direction, give them empowerment. So we talk about empowered agile teams. And how do you continuously focus on only removing impediments? How do you continuously focus on, hey, are we delivering the right customer value? So these are some of the questions which, in my mind, the leader should start asking, rather than going with the approach that, hey, I know all of this, I have done this before, I will show you guys and I will tell you guys how to do it, right? That, I think, that era is gone.
Right. I think you've hit upon a very important part, KP, is managing in uncertain times or managing in unknown times. It's
Exactly.
the motto that
Yeah.
we all need to be aware of, that things are
Yeah.
changing
Yeah.
so rapidly
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Hey,
you
I think, Ravindra, that's a great thing. Sorry to
know.
interject, but so I was reading somewhere that, in today's leadership, of course, we have to have much higher tolerance for unknowns, and to the point also to say, hey, you develop love for unknowns. So that was something which I recently heard, that as a leader, there is no longer certainty, right?
Right.
So you have to develop that love for unknown, and then show how do you want to, manage that unknown, right? How do you continuously discover and then start, learning along the way.
Fantastic. KP, is there anything else that you'd like to share in terms of perspective, given your vast experience between at the global level, at the India domestic market level, and keeping in mind the talent part, because at the end of it,
Sure.
people are most important. Everything around the world can change, but it impacts people at the end of the day. It relates to how
Sure.
I travel in my car, or what do I do in my vehicle, or is my two-wheeler going to get electrified soon, and so on. It ultimately impacts me as a person. So anything on that side you would like to share
Sure.
with us and our
Yeah,
listeners?
yeah. Yeah, for sure. So again, just extending what we just discussed a couple of minutes ago. So there is this whole need for tolerance for unknown, and as I said, love for unknown. So what has happened is both for the leaders as well as for the team members, there is this whole need to balance between discovery and delivery. you
Mhm.
know so what I mean by delivery is, hey, I know things and I need to execute with some predictability. That's the delivery part. And if I look back, let's say 5 years ago, much of my activities was focused more on execution and delivery, because more or less we knew, hey, these are the things we need to deliver. And then you just follow a time plan and try to mitigate the risks of thing, and then bring predictability. But today, what has happened because of all this emerging technologies, and a lot of unknowns, we also need to have a strong discovery process. So like as leaders, we need to motivate our engineers. How do they discover along the way? So they have to start developing the ability to discover in the right way, and also in a kind of an efficient way. So how do they run experiments, and how does the leader support these experiments?
One quick
If
question,
Yeah.
any example, KP, because that would help some of our listeners to understand and relate to what you're saying. Any quick example in that area?
Yeah, I mean, for example, when we are looking at gesture recognition, for example, when we look at image, recognition, the fundamental nature of AI and machine learning is it's not a deterministic, kind of model. So the algorithms learn the data, and then they try to predict, you know, and there is a certain amount of accuracy which can get built into the model,
Okay.
right? For example, if I'm a development engineer and if I'm a validation engineer, earlier I would write a requirement, and then I would implement it. And it used to be a deterministic way that given these inputs, there is an output. And
Mm.
then as a validation engineer, I would say, hey, if these are the inputs, and these should be the outputs, right? So everything was deterministic. But the moment we come into this realm of AI and kind of discovery, uh, there are a lot of things which are not deterministic. So there
Mhm.
is a certain level of probability, there is a certain level of accuracy. Then there are three players. There is a manager, there is a person who is developing a software, and then there is a person who is testing the software. And all three people need to start understanding, hey, there is a certain element of probability here. It's no longer deterministic. So how do I deal with this condition?
Fantastic.
Right? Is the amount of data enough? Is my algorithm giving the right amount of efficient, accuracy, or should I, fine tune it? So these are all discovery questions, and
Right.
nobody will give them answers. So it's all debates and discussions. That should happen.
Fantastic. Yeah. Anything else
So, yep.
before we end up?
Sure. Yeah. And just continuing on this whole discovery and delivery, I would think that the leaders should encourage the engineers to do kind of daily learning and continuous learning, because the technologies are changing so fast. And what we realize is, again, recently, I was reading somewhere about half life of technology skills.
Mhm.
And what do we mean by half life of technology skills? The utility value of certain technologies or certain skills which the engineers probably are using will dramatically lose its value over a period of time. It's earlier it could be 4 years, 5 years, but today many technologies it's probably 2 years. So it loses its utility value very, very fast, right? And so the engineers have to always pay attention to some of these so-called half-life of skills, and try to adapt. Are there new technologies that are coming up? So I need to be able to prepare with those new technologies, right?
So continuous reskilling, understanding what's changing, for
Absolutely.
new things which are happening in the external markets, or coming up with something yourself. Yeah. So the basic learning, at the end of it, the learning is that if you're not agile, you'll be fragile. So you'll just
Oh,
break.
that's a good one.
It was a pleasure interacting with you. Thank you very much from Amrop India.